Hey everyone, Disturb43216 here, continuing on with the In Flames discography. Today we're going to be talking about their 2000 release, which is the album known as Clayman. Now, this album is not as good as Colony was, but it's still one of their best albums. And while there's not as many tracks that jumped out at me as Colony, some of them are better than Colony, some of them are not as good as Colony. So it makes up an album that's overall not as good, but it's still really good. So let's talk about my personal favorite tracks on the album. One of my favorite tracks is the opener, Bullet Ride, which has a really catchy intro riff that just kicks things off. Plus, there's got some really cool harmonized lead guitar during the chorus. Plus, there's some clean bits during the verse, which is pretty interesting. Now, Anders is doing some interesting vocals on this track. This sort of soft spoken word type of stuff in the verses, and then it gets into the more like heavy screaming and growling stuff in the pre-chorus and in the chorus. And there's some really great lyrical content on this album. It's definitely one of the better tracks on the album. The next song I want to talk about is the second track, Pinball Map. And I actually saw them perform this live a few years ago, the first time I saw them perform live, which was at Mayhem Festival. I was fortunate enough to be one of the dates before they dropped off the tour. And this was one of the older tracks they played, and it was a pretty good song. What I like about the song is it has these sort of short, chuggy riffs during the verse. During the verse, and then in the chorus is more melodic stuff. And then on vocals, like there's actually some sort of singing. Anders does a bit of singing on this album. It's not, like on the Colony, there's a little bit of it, but it was sort of quiet and almost to the point where it's sort of spoken instead of sung. But on this album, there's some. The singing's a little bit better, and there's a bit better at singing at this point since he's been doing it for a bit more. And it sort of alternate between the singing and the screaming sort of works really cool in this song. Plus, this has got a really nice solo in the middle. Now, my favorite track on the album is the third track, titled Only for the Weak, which is probably one of their most well-known songs. But it has this really, really catchy main riff, plus some fantastic melodic playing. There's amazing melodic riffs on this song, especially the solo is just fantastic. It's really good. It's one of the best solos from In Flames. The next song I'll talk about is called Square Nothing, which, what I think about this song is there's some really, really good lyrics on this song. Plus it alternates between this, like in the verse it's got a weird song structure where it has this sort of intro part, and then it has a verse, and then a chorus, and then the verse, and then the next verse is different. So it sort of starts with like sort of spoken word, and then it moves into more screaming and growling and stuff. Plus, there's a really fantastic melodic riff during the chorus, which really stands out to me. This is one of the slower songs of the album, and they execute it really well. Another slow song on the album is Satellites and Astronauts, which is another pretty well-known song from them. What I like about the song is that it's really slowed down, and it's got a lot of clean guitar riffs on this, as opposed to heavily distorted stuff. And then it alternates into more heavy sounding stuff. Plus, there's some great lead playing on this song, which is just really catchy. The lead riffs that Jesper and Björn are playing on this track. Well, three more tracks I want to talk about. Clayman, the title track, is one of my favorite In Flames songs. It has some singing for the chorus, but this chorus sort of alternates between singing and screaming, and it's executed really well. Plus, there's some great riffs in this song. It's definitely one of the better songs on the album. A couple more songs I want to briefly mention. The ninth track, Swim, because it has amazing melodic riffs throughout. There's just so much harmonization and melodic playing, and a great solo in the song. It's one of my favorite In Flames songs just because of how melodic it is. Plus, it's got some pretty good lyrics, too. The last song I want to talk about is the second to last track, Suburban Me, simply because it's got a guest performance on the solo, which features Christopher Ahmet, who used to be a member of Arch Enemy, although he was still a member of that band at the time of the recording. I thought that was cool that they brought in another well-known Swedish musician from another big Swedish melodic death metal band to sort of appear on the sound. I thought that was a pretty cool thing. Plus, it's a really fantastic solo, too. So that wraps up my personal favorite tracks. There are a few other tracks I didn't talk about which didn't really stand out as much, so I don't really think they're worth talking about. Now let's get into the sound of the band here. Anders on vocals. Well, his vocal performance is not as good as it was on Colony. It's still really good. What I did notice about this album is that his screams are a bit higher pitched than they were on the previous album, which is sort of interesting, but they still sound really good. Plus, there's some cool stuff where he's singing too, which mixes it up a bit. Plus, there's a few bits where he's doing this sort of soft spoken word type stuff, which is sort of interesting the way it turned out. Plus, this is the first album that he wrote the lyrics entirely in English on, and he did not need help with the translation because he's finally sort of learned English, and he's got some really good lyrics on this album. It's not as much of the more abstract stuff on previous albums or the weird sci-fi stuff about the post-apocalyptic society, stuff like that. The lyrics are focused more personal. They're dealing with depression and that kind of stuff. But they are very good. It's some of the best lyrical work from In Flames. Plus, there are some songs like Swim, which sort of focus more on more abstract type of stuff as opposed to the more personal stuff dealt with on a lot of the other tracks on the album. So they do have some of that old lyrical content on here as well. Okay, let's get into Jesper and Björn on guitars. Some fantastic guitar work on this album. The sound of the production on the guitars just sounds really crunchy, a little bit more crunchy than the previous albums. Plus, there's some really good sounding clean guitar parts. Plus, the melodic lead playing is fabulous on this album. It sounds a bit just the production on the lead sounds a little bit better than it did on Colony, but I still prefer the sound of Colony a little bit better. But what sounds here is I like how it's a bit cleaner on the melodic parts at least, which makes it really good. Plus, there's some great, interesting riffs. There's some slower riffs and some faster riffs, and then, like I mentioned before, there's some great solos on this album. Peter on bass tends to follow along with the guitar a bit more on this album as opposed to on Colony, where there were a lot more tracks where he sort of went off and did his own thing. But what I like about this album, the bass is turned up nice and loud on this album. You can hear it constantly throughout the whole thing, and it adds a nice big meat to the guitar sound. Even though he's just following along with it, it sounds really good despite that. Plus, there are a few instances, like on Satellites and Astronauts and on Square Nothing, where the bass sort of shines a little bit, which I like. I always like to hear the bass kind of doing its own thing for a bit. And finally, Daniel on drums. The production on the drums is very good on this album. It's nice and heavy, and you can just feel the power of the bass drum on this album. I really like the way the drums turn out. Plus, again, he's doing some great fast playing, and he's always throwing in some interesting fills in between to keep things interesting. So Daniel is doing a great job on drums on this album. So that pretty much wraps up this album. I don't have as much to talk about as I did with Colony, as that was one of my favorite albums ever, and there's just so much to talk about on this album. But there's still a lot of great stuff on this album. So overall, I give it an 8 out of 10. It doesn't reach the full potential that I've seen from this band, as you can see from Colony, which I rated a 10, but this is still one of their better albums, and it's definitely worth checking out if you're getting into this band. Okay, that's it for the review. If you like me, be sure to like the video and subscribe to see more. Go check out the rest of the In Flames reviews I've done so far, and be ready for the next few to come out over the next few weeks. See you guys in the next video.